New series of videos of homemade diesel fuel. I'm going to explain some of the first things you want to look into. Videos are going to get kind of long and monotonous, but if you stay tuned, you'll understand all of it. The first things you want to figure out is what can you run the homemade diesel fuel in. So most furnaces, like I would say 2005 and older, they are mostly low pressure fuel systems. They tend to like a 40% gasoline to 60% motor oil mix. Diesel engines like this and trucks that have direct injection pumps will run on this homemade diesel fuel. So you can usually tell because they are kind of like a rotary injection pump. Basically, the dead giveaway is these high pressure fuel lines coming out of the injection pump to the injectors. A lot of questions everyone asks me, will this homemade diesel fuel work in a newer diesel? No, it won't, because the newer diesel engines have too many electronics and sensors. So usually after 2005 they started adding the EGR valve, which will usually clog up with carbon, and then you have the O2 sensor in the exhaust that will usually get coated with carbon so they don't read properly. And also you have the DEF filters, like the DEF system, and all that honeycomb stuff in the exhaust will clog up with carbon as well. See, this homemade diesel fuel, why it's black is because of carbon in it. Now, the whole filtration and settling process gets most of the carbon out of the oil, but it does not get all of it out. So, all this is about to get most of the carbon out so you can still run it in a motor, basically. Like IDI system, they're like the 7.3 liter IDI, those will run on homemade diesel fuel as well. They all require different mixtures. Why they use different mixtures is just because of the different types of fuel systems and common rails and injection pumps and injectors and fuel lines and electric fuel pumps and everything. Like my old dozer here is gravity feed from the fuel tank under the seat down through the fuel filters into the injection pump. So I cannot run this very thick. So these machines tend to like a 30% gasoline to 70% motor oil. I try to mix the fuel as thick as I can because the more oil I can use, the cheaper it gets, because the motor oil I get for free. So that's why the mixtures are different. If you did one standard mix, it would be a 40% gas to 60% oil. That's almost the same exact viscosity as diesel fuel, and that's what we're trying to match or replicate. Stinky Pete here has a better electric pump, and this tends to run on a 90% motor oil and 10% gasoline for my summer mix. For the winter mixes, I usually just add 5 to 10% gasoline to the mix. That way, when it gets like below zero, like 10 below or 15 below, the oil gets a little bit thicker when it gets that cold. So just adding a little bit more gasoline in the mix, boom, you're done. No fuel additives needed, no gelling issues or anything. So Stinky Pete normally runs on a 20% gasoline to 80% motor oil during the winter, like it is right now. My machines will tend to run on a 35 to 40% gasoline to oil mix during the winter like this. If you're in the Arctic, I would probably mix a 50% gasoline to 50% motor oil up in those -40 and -50 below temperatures. But the best part is that this stuff will not gel up. It will tend to stay nice and thin through all those cold temperatures and not have to worry about it. I'll get into more details of the mixtures and viscosities and stuff later on, but I just wanted you to mainly identify what can you run it in. Second thing you need to worry about is not just what to run it in, is trying to secure your liquids on where to go get this kind of stuff. You can go to any local garage, mom and pop show, and junkyards. You can use any kind of oil for this process. So like power steering fluid, brake fluid, gear oil, hydraulic oil, Vaseline, grease, gear oil, hydraulic oil, vegetable oil, animal fat, anything like that. Anything that's an oil-based liquid. If you have a way to turn stuff solid into liquids, you can, like a gasifier, like a still, like when they distill alcohol. So you can even make diesel fuel out of plastics and car tires if you wanted to. But you go to your junkyards and you get totes, and you can go and get them filled and stuff like that. You have a machine with forks, it will help a lot. Getting any kind of oil-based liquids that is thick and thin so you can mix them together to get the right viscosity. So You can get something thick like gear oil and thin it out with something thinner like paint thinner. Go to a body shop, see if you can get some used paint thinner. Transmission shops. Transmission fluid you can almost run straight. It's usually thin enough. Stale gasoline or even fresh gasoline from the pumps. You can use nail polish remover, varnish, anything like that to thin it out. I have to get my shed all cleaned up. I haven't organized it in a while, but basically this is my whole mixing process in my little shed. You really just need 4 or 5 totes, and I can usually make about 250 gallons per week. You want to try to have a machine with forks or a pallet jack so you can move totes around. It's a lot easier. Otherwise, you would have to put an empty tote where you want it, pump it into that empty tote, and then pump it back out, and basically transferring fuels from tote to tote. And that's what I used to do when I started the whole process. But once I got my machine and a pallet jack from the junkyards and stuff like that, it made it a lot easier. So you could take a shed like this or a garage, or you could take a sea container and set this all up in a sea container or an old tractor trailer. You cut the axles off, put it down on the ground, and you can set up this whole process to do it. My primary oil pump. This kind of pump, it's hard to explain, but there's a little gear in here, and then there's a ring gear in here to pump the fluid in. It's the same thing in most modern oil pumps and engines, or like transmission pumps. These are made to pump straight motor oil or gear oil. That pump is the most important pump you'll need for this whole process. I know that pump is like $600 or $700, but I've had that same pump for years. The pump you need is just a little tiny oil pump. This has like one of those little oscillating little pistons inside, and this will pump straight motor oil, and it pumps it nice and slow. I usually put it like on 6 volts, even though it's a 12-volt pump. I'll explain later why you want to pump that nice and slow. I'll get to that later. And then pretty much the last pump you would need if you want to transfer just the fuel or pre-mixed fuels or gasoline around, like a regular pump like this, and just have some of these extra pickup hoses and screens. I used one of them on my big pump right there with about a 20-foot hose. The thing you have to worry about before you start doing any homemade diesel fuel, after you figure out what machines or furnaces will run on it, and also after figuring out where to get your oil and gasoline and stuff, is you gotta look up your local laws and regulations. So in the state of Pennsylvania, I explained in previous videos that it's legal, but just barely. On their DOT website, there's a list of what's called alternative fuels. Vegetable oil is on that list. So technically, to run vegetable oil here in Pennsylvania or anywhere in the United States for their federal DOT book, you need to have a permit and registration. And you have to pay your road taxes on it. So for homemade diesel fuel, there's kind of a loophole that the law does not specifically state you cannot run motor oil in your vehicle. Your motor needs oil to run, either as a lubricant or as fuel. So it's basically it's like a 2-stroke engine, like a road legal dirt bike or jet skis or snowmobiles or anything like that. When I talk to attorneys and judges, I'm technically running mixed gasoline. So that's the loophole. The only laws I can find out is you cannot sell it without proper permits and certifications. There's one. The second thing is you cannot use in a commercial vehicle. The law states a commercial vehicle can only run on on-road diesel fuel. So technically under that clause, you cannot run any alternative fuels except ultra-low highway diesel fuel and stuff like that. So do not use this fuel in a commercial vehicle. But for off-road use, like excavators and machines, completely legal. Those are off-road use. So anything like that is no big deal. Also, on the stale gasoline I get from junkyards, the road taxes are already paid for on this gasoline. Your sales tax is paid for, and your road taxes are paid for. Motor oil, your sales taxes are already paid for. You're just reusing the other stuff that people paid for and don't want anymore. So this is legal in most states, but you have to look up your laws. The other laws you might run into is emissions. So, like, this would be illegal in California and New York City because of their emissions and crap. So you gotta check into your laws, make sure everything is legal before doing anything like that. The other thing is your laws for township. There's laws for how much combustible liquids you can have on your property and stuff. So in my county, if I remember correctly, was 1,000 gallons of fuel. So there's nothing saying motor oil. So just mainly I have to worry about how much gasoline I have and how much pre-mixed gasoline and oil I have. But as long as I stay under that 1,000 gallons, I'm good to go. All these laws I have looked into myself. I've looked into all the different online websites and stuff, looking up all local laws. I had friends of mine that are attorneys looked into it. I called a couple of friends of mine that are police officers, and I even talked to a judge about this before making videos on it and sharing this knowledge with you. And so it was a big pain in the butt. I think I spent about 3 to 4 weeks doing research to make sure this was all legal. Because I started doing this a long time ago when I desperately needed fuel and I cannot afford to buy fuel. I'm like, why can I not keep doing this? So I checked to make sure it's legal. And when I found the little loopholes and stuff, I'm like, I'm going to keep doing this. Why keep spending $5-6 a gallon for diesel fuel when I can make my own for usually around 10 to 40 cents per gallon? Another law there is you can only have so many combustible liquids inside your house, which is a living residence. I do this all in my shed out in the middle of the field, and there's no houses within about 150 yards. So these are all storage buildings. So all this is done nice and safe, and I will explain later when you're transferring the gasoline to be careful of the fumes and everything like that. Another thing you want to keep in mind, I haven't done it yet, but what I plan on doing in my shed, putting the rubber mats or tarps in here to contain any oil spills. I'm going to get ready to pull everything out of here and get that done. I have never had time to do it yet. I'm hoping to get it done before I start my new job. But I have a whole pallet of rubber, which was used for like rubber roofings and like the liners for ponds and stuff like that. Basically, it's in case of a busted tank or valve or something like that, it has a way to contain all the fluids. So usually you don't have to worry about too much because of residential, but if you're doing this commercially, this is a huge deal. But for personal use, it's really not that big a deal. I have in my shed, the whole floor is tapered to a drain in the corner there, and also that goes down into a grease trap and everything. But I have the drain sealed off right now, so I accidentally spilled, I think the one day when that barrel overfilled, about 20 gallons, and it all stayed in my shed, and I just cleaned it up with some kitty litter and the wet dry vac of the squeegee and stuff. But always keep that kind of stuff on hand and keep an eye for it. You do not want to have any major spills. That's a big deal. To try to keep up with your local, DEP or EPA or whatever. I can't think of all of it. I'm not up to date on all these technical terms, but you want to try to keep this as clean and safe as possible. To be honest, I really need a drip pan for my machines. Both of my machines are antiques. They're both 67, and every time I park them, you can see how they leak underneath. So my machines, I really need to get them like drip pans under it and stuff like that. But these are all issues you want to keep up with. So if there's any issues, everything is done and kept up with. Still working on my shed and my property to get all this stuff set up better and to be safer. It's just been really hard to get time away from work and everything. But like I said, I have a whole pallet of all this rubber matting stuff. So I'm going to do all my storage totes in the back of the shed. I'm going to lay that rubber down and have the edges up and everything. Containments, I forget what they're called, but I'm getting ready to do all that for my storage totes in the back in my shed, so everything is nice and clean. And I try to stay under that 1,000 gallon limit. And if you go a little bit over, they're not going to kill you over it. Like I said before, this is all residential stuff, so you have a little bit more leeway with this. Same thing with like on-road use. If personal use, you can do a lot more things than commercial use. So, but any totes you have, you gotta make sure you check them every week. Make sure none of them are leaking, none of them are damaged. Also, make sure the valves have the caps on them, so in case the valves start leaking, no issues. So far, the only spill I've ever had was in my shed when that barrel overflowed, and it was about 20 gallons or so. But like I said, it was all contained in my shed. I cleaned it all up, and those are things you just want to keep an eye on. So I got my machine started, letting it warm up. What I'm getting ready to do is take some of these empty totes I have behind my shed back to the junkyard, because these totes are not even mine. I just basically pick up the totes of motor oil and gasoline. I use what I can out of them, and I take them right back. So like I said before, you don't need this many totes. I'm going to do what, I think 3 or 4 trips to the junkyard today. Take what, I think it was I think about 10 of these totes I'm taking back to the junkyard. I can either put them all on my trailer, but I don't want to take the time to ratchet strap them down. I'm not that far, it's only like 5 miles down the road. So I'm just going to put 2 on the back of Stinky Pete, take him back to the junkyard, and he's going to fill them basically back up of either motor oil or gasoline. These 2 totes of gasoline are going back to the junkyard today, and almost all of these motor oil totes are going back. And once I set the 1 tote on, I'll go ahead, grab the top tote, and basically since I can't reach all the way to the back of the truck, I'll just get lined up here and push it in. Push totes in, you got to make sure you don't poke into the bottom of the front one. And if your forks stick out through the bottom of the tote, you want to make sure the fork is going into the, like, underneath this tote. If you have it too high, you don't want to poke a hole into the bottom of these totes with your forks. If I wanted to, with empty totes, I can have 2 high and still be under my 13-foot tall, height. So I can put another 2 empty totes on this and strap them down and take them in 4 at a time. Normally when I pick up gasoline or oil from anywhere, I normally only do just 1 tote. To one, stay under that weight limit of the truck, because this is only a 1/2 ton, and I try to stay under so many gallons and stuff like that. Even though I do have my hazmat and tanker endorsements, but I try to stay under those limits. Technically, you're not supposed to have more than 100 gallons of oil or fuel in your truck, but like I said before, with residential use, you have a little bit more leeway. So I'm only getting like gasoline and oil from a local shop and bringing it straight home. I'm not doing like all over the place and stuff like that. Okay, normally when I pick up gasoline from the junkyard as well, is I usually have just the 1, and I usually have 1 or 2 straps on these, usually 3 of them. You want to have usually 1 in front, which is usually this rear one is the one that'll usually have gasoline in it. So I usually put 1 from the side rail to the other side along the front of this tote in case I have to do an emergency stop. I do usually 2 over the top of it, and I usually have 1 in the back too in case I have to like really accelerate hard, but it's up against the tailgate as well. Or you can put it towards the front of the truck like this. That way you're up against the header board, and then you can still have like 1 strap along the back and 1 or 2 over top. And in case you have to do an emergency brake situation, you have no issues. During the summer, I usually have my air conditioner in the back window, so I usually keep it towards the middle or back of the truck. Right now, I could usually keep a full one towards the front right now without the air conditioner. Another stuff I like to do is put like a tire right here beside of them so they can't twist. You know, they stay good up against the wheel well or the header board or tailgate, but like a rim tire here and rim tire there, or just an empty bad tire to help keep these from shifting will help too. Dropping off these 2 empty totes and put them over here in a pile of other empty totes so they can fill them up with oil or gasoline from all the junk vehicles. All vehicles stacked up ready to get processed. So like they drain all the fluids out, they take your rims and tires off. They have a rim crusher to get the tires off the rims. Basically your normal junkyard stuff, you know. This is what they do every day. Now what they usually do with the motor oil, most of that motor oil they burn for heat, to heat their shops. So I tend to get motor oil which they don't need, like the extra oil, or from local shops. I still go pick it up because I don't get a lot of oil from the junkyard because he burns so much of it, but he doesn't use any of the gasoline. So I usually buy what I need. Whatever I don't need, he'll have a company come up and pump out his tanks and totes that goes to like recycler and stuff like that. So I usually just buy what I need in stale gasoline. I only need usually about 1 tote a year of gasoline, because I'm not mixing that much fuel. My personal use, I only use maybe about 500 gallons a year between my truck here, my machines and heat and all that, so I really don't need that much gasoline. Other things I like about junkyards is not just getting liquids or fuels, basically unwanted stuff that I can use and recycle basically. These tires and plastics, with a gas fire you can heat up and recondense into diesel fuel or gasoline, or you could just take that vapor, run it right into your furnace and burn it, or you can run it into like a generator, like the air intake of a generator, and just feed it right in and run off the flammable gases from these tires. You have energy right here that nobody wants. You can reuse. Like I said before, use motor oil and gasoline when it's mixed. Motor oil has more energy than diesel fuel. So I tend to see about a 30% increase on horsepower, torque, and fuel mileage. So usually I was getting about 18 miles per gallon on diesel fuel with Stinky Pete. Now I get over 27. So there are benefits, and there's only there's a lot of benefits, but there's only a couple downsides of running motor oil. One of the downsides is it runs a lot hotter than regular diesel fuel. If you can adjust your air fuel mixture, you just cut it back. If you can adjust your timing, advance it a couple degrees, because it takes a little bit longer to ignite because it has a higher flash point. So advance that a little bit. The downside of it as well is the extra carbon buildup in the exhaust system, but it's nothing that the motor can't handle, either in the cylinders or the exhaust itself. Now, running it in a furnace, because it burns hotter and then you have that carbon buildup, you have to make sure it's a good furnace. Usually I run this in a boiler type system furnace, and so with the boiler it can handle the higher heat better, and you got to make sure it has good fireproofing on the inside, that like asbestos or firebox type stuff, so the flame is not in direct contact to the sides of the furnace, because when you're burning motor oil, it's a little bit corrosive. So if the flames are direct contact of the metal itself, will tend to corrode it away. So on like forced hot air furnaces, if that asbestos flame catch goes bad and that flame comes in direct contact with the heat tubes, it will either get too hot to either potentially melt them, lose their temper, or corrode them. So that's something to keep in mind as well when you're running in a furnace. Also, you'll have extra carbon buildup in the firebox itself and also the chimney. Not a whole ton. Worst case scenario, after about 5 to 8 years, you'll have to take the burner out, go in there like a wet dry vac and suck up some of the carbon buildup sitting on the bottom. Every once in a while, you might get a carbon buildup building on the nozzle on the furnace. You might have to clean off. And if the nozzle clogged up because of maybe some dirty fuel that got past your fuel filter, you could just take the nozzle out, take it apart, clean it, put it back in. And also, to adjust the furnace to run on motor oil, because there's more energy in it, you usually have to either add a little bit more air or take away. You just make an adjustment, look outside your chimney, see if there's any smoke coming out. I believe white smoke is too much air, black smoke is too little air. So just little adjustments like that. Your furnace will tend to kick on for a smaller period of time running on motor oil, and tend to stay off longer periods of time because it gets so hot so fast. So I was planning on doing an outdoor wood burner that has the diesel burner on it. Take the diesel burner out and get an actual waste oil burner from these furnaces that are made to run motor oil. I'd put that in, and then I can run straight motor oil, and it's pretty much free to heat the house during the winter. Right now, I'm just running on that 40% gas and 60% motor oil mix. That's it. So I'll try to keep updated on all these different things and all this information, but on to the next thing. One question is, for commercial use that's for offer, like bulldozers, something like machines with like a C15 engines and stuff like that, really big engines, like big D5 or D6s and stuff like that. The old ones can run on this homemade diesel fuel, like old loaders and bobcats and skid steers, but like I said before, it runs hot. So if you're running a bulldozer and running it like full throttle and pushing big amounts of dirt, you might have issues with the exhaust temperature or the engine temperature, especially on big industrial engines like that. So something to keep in mind. It will work, but you got to keep an eye on those temperatures, like I said before. Most engines and machines, like my machines, I'm not running them heavy duty, and they have big enough radiators they can stay cool no problem. But those machines should stay cool. Just keep an eye on it. You really want to make sure the exhaust temperature doesn't get too hot. I got my shed cleaned out now. I did forget to tell you, you do need a wet dry vac for the whole process. But as you can see, this is the whole mixing process pretty much right here. This is the only stuff you really need. The rest of it you don't have to have. But I'll show you once I get this all set up to run more batches. I used to have that pump mounted up on the wall, and what I did was I had a tote here, like these 3 totes with mixed fuel. I used to have it hooked up where I could just at any time flip valves and pump out whatever batch I want and fill up the truck. I used to have the metal pickup hose right here that threaded into the lid of these totes right here. And I had it so it stayed about 3 inches off the bottom, but once that pump went bad, I didn't replace it or anything like that. So I just kind of left it up there. I never even took it down off the wall yet. But that's something I know you'll see. I tried that in the past, but I don't need it anymore. Just like these centrifuges. But as you can see, an old wet dry vac. I showed you before, the big pump, the little pump. You'll need like a funnel. Like a drill with a mixer that I made that'll fit down into the totes to mix it. This big funnel, which this mega funnel, I'll explain later why it's nice to have that. An old like 25-gallon drum and a bed sheet. The thread count, I don't know what that is. It's a very coarse thread count on it. You can use a t-shirt if you want, but I've been using the same bed sheet for 6 years. You'll see later in the videos, you do not have to replace the bed sheet. You use the wet dry vac and you can clean it out every 1,000 gallons of motor oil or whatnot. So I'll show you later in the videos. Still do not organize my workbench, but I'm going to move this vacuum over, but I got my machine with another tote of oil. I'm going to bring it in. Now all the totes are in place. That's the stale gasoline. These are my 2 mixing totes, my first stage motor oil, my raw motor oil. Now this motor oil was already sitting outside for 4 weeks, so I brought it in here. Yeah, I did disturb it a little bit, but it's going to sit in here for a couple days and let it settle back down, make sure everything is settled to the bottom. That's very important for this whole process, is letting things settle. That's the best way and the fastest way to get this filtered nice and clean. Water is more dense than motor oil, so it's going to settle to the bottom of this tote. Antifreeze, metal, dirt, anything like that is going to settle to the bottom of this tote. Now, anything that's the same density as motor oil, like hair, dust, and pine needles and leaves, will be floating around inside the oil. Anything less dense than the oil will float on the top. But that's what the bed sheet is for. The bed sheet is to catch all that crap that's the same density or less dense. It's the same thing with this stale gasoline. You can use fresh gasoline if you want to. If you can get stale gasoline from junkyards, then go ahead and do that. I buy this for $1 a gallon. Gasoline I get from junkyards is usually very clear, so you can see right through the bottom. You'll see all the mud and dirt and crap at the bottom of these. If you want, you could take a little sample of some gasoline, mix it with some dirt, shake it up and set it on the shelf, and you'll see how it will settle out. No problem. Another important thing, when you're using the gasoline, always make sure that the lids are tight. And also make sure the lids are airtight, because this gasoline, you don't want it to evaporate and get either more stale or lose any gasoline just from evaporation. Now, most of these lids on these totes will have either a little vent on them. Like inside that center cap, there's a spring-loaded valve. So when you drain these totes from the bottom valves, it lets air in. But what's bad is it lets air out as well. So you want to try to make sure the lids are completely airtight. Now, motor oil does not matter. The straight motor oil, it can be vented. You don't have to worry about it. It's only the gasoline and your mixed fuel you do not want to have exposed to the air. So after you mix the gasoline oil, try to make sure it's in fully airtight totes. If it stays airtight, like this tote that's mixed fuel, it will last for like 5, 6 plus years. It doesn't go bad long as it's not exposed to the air. So like for the furnace to heat the house, whatever fuel I don't use during the winter, I have to in the fall add more gasoline to the mix to get it right to the proper viscosity. That's something you have to keep an eye out. So like my machines and like my truck and stuff, if my machines were going to sit for like, let's just say several days in a row, then you have to make sure you have extra gasoline in the mix so you can kind of factor in that evaporation of the fuel and stuff sitting for long periods of time. But if it's in airtight containers, you don't have to worry about it. If it's straight motor oil, you don't have to worry about it. Okay, I'm going to try to give you an example where I would be at this point, at this stage. This tote is already mixed with fuel. Let's just say I mixed that 1 week ago and it's sitting here and settling out. This batch was already done and I just pumped it out. Now I'm going to show you how I clean this out with the wet dry vac. Keep some kitty litter and rags on hand just in case any spills, but on the wet dry vac, any old wet dry vac will work. Now on this wet dry vac, I have the cap to seal off the end, the vent. If you don't have the cap on it, what tends to happen if you vacuum a lot, little droplets come out the back side, and you can see how it kind of splattered on the wall the one day. As long as you keep that cap on there, it does not do that. And I usually have a rag underneath it in case any little droplets come out the side vent right here on this wet dry vac. Now my big pump is off to the side. I just have the ends hung up so they're not dripping. And same thing with the wet dry vac. I just have it hanging up out of the way. And like I said in the previous videos, I don't use these centrifuges anymore. I found out just letting it settle under normal gravity is the best way. You don't have to fight with these or anything. So what's left behind from this previous batch, I would say, is about 10 to 15 gallons. You know, it's the leftover sludge. Now I'm going to vacuum that out, and it's still good fuel. I'm just going to refine it better. So what I do is I'll take that and put it into a different tote. See, I have my funnel already ready. Now this is the tote filled with all the sludge left over from previous batches. So after this gets filled right up to the top with all that leftover sludge, I'm going to let it sit for a couple weeks, and I'm going to pump the top half of all that good clean fuel. The bottom half I'm either going to take to a recycling center, or I can use it as good fire starters. So I could burn off this old brush and logs and crap around the property. Before you vacuum out the sludge, make sure you have your vacuum sitting on like an old rag or something like that. Something draped over the vent to make sure it catches any droplets. Okay, I got most of this cleaned out so you can see the sludge at the bottom. The best way to explain what it's like is like a thick grease that's left at the bottom of this. That is the carbon that has settled to the bottom of this tote. That's what makes your oil dirty. It's all that black carbon. Now there will be little pieces of metal and dirt and stuff that has gotten through the bed sheet. That's also mixed with it as well. But any big chunks of carbon the bed sheet will catch. Anything really small will be settled out like this. A good example what people use carbon for is for like makeup. A lot of inks and stuff like that will have carbon mixed with it to make it black like that for coloring. So like even after washing my hands, it still like stains your hands. So we'll get the rest of this. Of course I have the extension on my wet dry vac so I can get all the way down to the bottom of the tote. Now I'm all done vacuuming it out, so as you can see, it's all done. Now you don't have to get it all. So I'm done vacuuming this tote out. Now I was saying before, you don't have to use the wet dry vac to vacuum out the sludge in these totes. If you had a tank that had a V bottom in it, like I was saying before, you can let it settle in that and open the valve on the bottom and drain out that sludge. And then you have an outlet about 6 inches or more off the bottom, and that could be piped out to your storage tanks. Now that would be the best way to do this, but like I was saying before, I don't want to spend the money to try to get those kind of tanks or find them. So that's why I'm using the totes and the wet dry vac to do all this. I had an idea of putting some boards on the back of these totes to tilt them forward so I could use the valve that's on these totes. That is something I'm going to try later on, so I can try to drain the sludge out without using the wet dry vac. That's something I'm going to experiment with later. So now we're going to take a little break from this for right at the moment and go over to the used motor oil and get that going. Normally I pump the gas into that tote and then pump the oil from that tote into there, but this tote is empty. I got to filter more motor oil. Okay, so this is my raw motor oil I pick up from local garages, and you can see there's a lot of crap in here. You can see it just stuck to the top of this tote. So I have this little pump. It will pump about 5 gallons per hour on 6 volts from the battery charger. So on the pickup hose, which is the black hose right here, I just have a steel pipe on the end of it to weigh it down. So what I do is I put it down in the oil all the way to the bottom. And you'll feel it when it hits the bottom. So right there, hit the bottom. I can feel all the crap at the bottom. And I'm going to pull this up about 6 inches. And then what I do is I use the battery charger to hold it so it does not go down to the bottom of this tote. But here's a very important thing you want to do so you don't spill any oil. That's a 330 gallon tote, and you can see it has about 30 gallons in there. So I have room for 250 gallons for that tote and before we'll get close to overfilling. Keeping that pickup about 10 inches off the bottom, I'm only going to get about 220 gallons. I want to make sure all this oil will fit into that tote. Even if you have to put the pickup halfway down or only a quarter way down the tote, make sure this will fit into that tote. Another thing to keep in mind, this tote was sitting outside for about 3 to 4 weeks. Then I brought it inside, being very careful not to disturb it, and it sat in here for a week before starting to pump out. So all the water and dirt and metal and sludge and crap, almost all of that will be at the bottom of that tote settled out. Okay, now the line coming out off of that pump is going to go up to this barrel. If you have a junction, make sure there's hose clamps so it doesn't come apart. Also, vice grip the end of this to the top of the barrel so it does not come out of the barrel. Now to talk about the barrel, how to set it up. This is a standard open lid barrel, but what I did was cut a hole in the bottom of it with a torch, and I tapered it so they come out nice and smooth. So I laid the bed sheet in and I put a ratchet strap on here nice and tight and make sure it's up so it's up against this lip like it is on the back side, so this bed sheet doesn't slide down in. Another important thing is to keep this bed sheet off the bottom of the barrel. It's suspended in the barrel. It's about, I would say, 3/4 of the way down. Between half to 3/4, just nice and draped inside. And the ratchet strap keeps it from falling down in. If this bed sheet is not suspended, it's going to go up against the sides or against the bottom. It's not going to filter down through this bed sheet good. Now, if it's a brand new bed sheet, you might have to readjust the strap a few times until it's done like stretching or settling. Make sure it doesn't droop down to the bottom. Like I said before, I've been using the same bed sheet for about 5-6 years. I'll show you later how I clean that out. So I have the line coming up into the vice grips. The vice grip is just clamped onto the barrel. It's not pinching the line. It just holds the line in place so it does not slide off. So as you're running motor oil, the more dirty this bed sheet gets, the higher that oil level will get up into the bed sheet. You'll kind of see the line from the previous batch is about halfway up. See, why it's doing that is as the bed sheet clogs up at the bottom, it's getting higher to cleaner spots of the bed sheet so it filters through. So that's why I have it sitting on this mega funnel. In case this bed sheet completely clogged up with carbon, it can overflow from this barrel into this funnel and down into the tote. So my dipper and my drill and everything sits on this as a drip pan basically. Everything goes down and falls into the tote. So now this barrel could be anywhere on the top of this tote. I used to have this set up right over the hole so it goes right down in. sitting on some 2x4s, but I got this funnel, so now I can have this bed sheet anywhere on here. It's hard to see it under there, but it comes out the center of that funnel down into that tote. So now I'm going to put this battery charger on 6 volts at 1.5 amps. Nothing crazy. Since we're just starting off, we could just put that on hold. Just like that. That bed sheet was just cleaned. It's good to go. I can run this whole batch without any issues. So why I have it on 6 volts is I want this pump to go as slow as possible to make sure that barrel will filter all that motor oil and not overflow. Check to make sure you're pumping oil, not water. And try a little bit on your finger to make sure it's actually motor oil, not like thick grease from the bottom. What I used to do is when this tote, let's just say, had more motor oil in it than what that will hold, I used to set the timer on this battery charger and pump about like 10 gallons at a time. But in case that pumped a little bit faster than normal, you don't want to overflow that tote. That's why you want to make sure this will all fit into that first stage motor oil tote. So now, since the battery charger is turned on, now we can look away and check on it at the end of the week. Usually throughout the week, I'll just check it quick in the morning before I go to work and at the afternoon after work and stuff, and I'll just keep checking in on it to make sure it's all going good. It's more to check to make sure it's not overflowing from the bed sheet, so I don't have to run that motor oil through the bed sheet again. So once this tote is filled with motor oil, I tend to let it sit for about a week. And then when that's done settling out, then I'll mix it in the mixing tote with gasoline and oil. Now you don't have to let this first stage and second stage motor oil settle for a long period of time. It's mainly after you mix with gasoline and oil, you want to have it sit for at least 2 weeks. For home heating oil for the furnace, you gotta let that sit for like 4 weeks each batch to make sure that all settles out good so you're not clogging up nozzles. Settling is the most important thing of this whole process. Now, it might sound like a lot of time to make each batch, but I'm not here watching it. So basically, it's from start to finish, it would take about 4 to 6 weeks to make one full batch. But for me, one batch will last me 6 months. If you have to make more gallons to keep up with machines or tractor trailers and stuff, you would just have to do more batches or bigger batches. Now, normally I already have this already done before vacuuming out this tote and mixing a batch. I'm just a little bit behind. I kind of was jumping a little bit ahead of myself and just trying to show people how to do this. So to give you the best example, let's just say this was already running all week long, running motor oil into that tote. So on the weekend, what I would do is, first thing is I would take this empty tote out and bring another full tote in of motor oil. Then whatever batch I had done, like this one is done right now, I would pump this out into a nice clean storage tote, and then I would vacuum out the sludge, mix it with gasoline and oil, and then mix it, and then leave and come back next weekend. Okay, let's just say this is the second week. Then again, this would be empty and that would be filled again with motor oil. So then what I would do would be this tote would be ready to pump out, the second mixing tote. Because this has been sitting for a week at that point. This has been sitting for 2 weeks at that point. I would pump this out, put it in a storage tank, vacuum it out, mix it with oil and gasoline, and then again, take this motor tote out, which would be empty, and bring another one in. And even the storage totes, when you're sitting somewhere, you're still doing the same thing. You're not pumping from the very bottom. So even after the motor oil sat for 1 week, the first stage motor oil sat for like that same week and stuff like that, it will even fill up more in these storage totes. Now this tote is going to be retired soon. As it's been outside, the sun biodegrades the plastic. So this plastic is getting very brittle. So this tote is going to be retired once it's empty. Got a brand new one to take its place. I'm just going to clean this out and get this ready. Like I said, all these other totes, the junkyard owns them. I just haven't taken the empty ones back yet. I only have about 6 totes total. Like even totes for motor oil, I usually only have 3 totes of motor oil. What I usually do is every weekend, once I pump a tote of oil out, I'll just run out like in that morning and run out to a local garage, and I'll just refill with motor oil and bring it back. If you have a good steady flow of oil from somewhere, you do not have to store oil around to keep up with it. You could just go and pick up motor oil on the weekends. It only takes me about a half hour to an hour to go pick up a tote of motor oil. So with my big pump, which pumps 15 gallons per minute, it takes me about, what, 5 minutes to drive out to like a shop, about 15 minutes to fill up the tote, 5 minutes to drive back, and it takes me, 5 minutes to pick up the whole tote with my machine and put it in here and run it through this bed sheet. And like I was saying before, if you don't have a machine, what you would do is basically this tote would be empty. You go and pick up motor oil. So you put an empty tote in the back of your truck, you fill it up, you back your truck up as close as you can to the shop. You use that 20-foot hose like I was saying before and pump it out of the truck into that empty tote. So you just have to do transferring around if you do not have a machine or a pallet jack. That's what I used to do before I bought machines. So while this is pumping through that bed sheet, now I'm going to explain a little bit about the dipper. Okay, this dipper is how I check the viscosity. Okay, so when you need to check viscosity, sometimes you might have motor oil which has a lot more transmission fluid, so you need less gasoline in the mix, or less kerosene or something to thin it out. Or the mix could have a lot more gear oil in this tote of oil, or diesel oil from a truck shop. So you might need more gasoline or kerosene or nail polish to thin out the batch. So all we took was like a little piece of flat steel, so I put a little handle on the end of it, and I welded it to the bottom of a paint can. So basically on the paint can, I took the grinder with the cutting wheel, and I cut the bottom of it off, so you can see down inside. And on the other end, I took the little spray nozzle out, so now it has a nice little hole in it. So when you're new to this, first you gotta figure out how long it takes diesel fuel to drain through this dipper. So you dip it in and you pull it out, you count how many seconds it takes for it to drain through the paint can. I already know this paint can takes 1 minute 15 seconds for diesel fuel to drain through. So this batch that I already mixed before, I'll dip it down in and I'll pull it out, and as you can see, it's going to drain through. So you count how many seconds it takes to drain through that paint can. Now this batch is made for the furnace, so it has to be very close to diesel fuel. If diesel fuel takes 1 minute and 15 seconds to drain through this paint can, I want to try to get it between 1 minute 15 seconds to 1 minute and 25 seconds. If it's too thick, the torpedo heater of the furnace is not going to run properly. So this is how you can check viscosity when it has to be precise. But for Stinky Pete and diesel engines, it does not have to be. So usually I just want to get between 1 minute 30 seconds to, I would say, 2 minutes to run in Stinky Pete. So I already have the mixtures figured out, so I don't have to check the viscosity every time. But I wanted to show you, like I said, it's nice to put this stuff up on this mega funnel so it can drip down into this tote. So now I'm going to talk about my mixer, which is just a regular drill with a just a homemade mixing head. It's just a piece of rebar with a little piece of flat steel on the end of it. I welded on, so it just basically barely fits down into the tote. So I stick like the half in there like that, and I could tilt it up and fit the whole thing down in. Now when you mix these batches up, make sure you mix them thoroughly. If you don't mix them good enough, it's not going to be evenly mixed all the way through. So I'll usually run it like clockwise for about like 15 seconds, then I'll run it in reverse about 15 seconds or 30 seconds to make sure this batch is mixed nice and good. So I'll pull it back out, let it drip off a little bit, and I put it back up on the funnel so it could drip down into the tote. So I'll come back to this in like a little bit and I'll show you the mixing process next. I'm starting to get ready to mix up some gasoline here in this tote and also go pick up some motor oil. So on my big pump, I took that 20-foot hose. I take off about like half of it, And I just put it off to the side right here. So I have a nipple here to connect both halves. I hook it to itself to make a nice roll. I do this because I don't need a 20-foot hose all the time. So I have it separated in the middle with a nipple, so I could just add or take away when needed. Big pump with the small hose, about, I would say 10 feet. I'm going to pump some of that gasoline into this mixing tote, get ready to mix a batch. Now, how to figure out how much gasoline to put in this tote, you could just use the gallons or the liters on the outside of it. Now, I normally mix during the summer for Stinky Pete 10%. So if you go by 1,000 liters, 100 liters is 10%. It's simple math, you know. So you want between 100 to 200 liters, or between 25 to 50 gallons. So 10% would be 100 liters, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. Like, it goes up. It's not that hard to figure out. So for the furnace, you want to be about 400, between 400 to 500 liters of gasoline to oil. So it's pretty simple. So I'm going to mix a 10% batch for Stinky Pete for my summer mix. So I'm going to pump about 100 liters or 25 gallons of stale gasoline into this tote. My big pump in, it's ready to start pumping. And I just got ran up into this tote here to turn on the pump. I'm going to pump it up to 25 gallons. Now, other vehicles or other applications will need different mixtures. So, like I explained before in previous videos, how to figure it out. So, most diesel engines cannot handle this thick of a mix. I would say a standard mix for all applications would be about 30% gasoline to 70% motor oil. That's your standard mix. Like I said, for diesel engines, it does not have to be precise. It could be like 40% gas to 60% oil. Some of them can go down to 5% gasoline to 95% oil. Some actually can run straight motor oil. It depends on the fuel system and your injectors and your injector pump. I went a little bit extra on this tote, so I went up to about 35 gallons, like 35, 40. I want to make sure I have enough gas in there because I think this has a lot of diesel truck oil in it. So I want to make sure I have enough gasoline. So now, once that tote is filled with that motor oil, I'm going to fill this up to 250 gallons with motor oil. Then I'm going to check the viscosity. And then I can see if I need to add more gasoline to the mix or add more oil to the mix. Since I ran some gasoline through my pump and flushed out any oil out of it, I figured I'd take it apart and show you what's on the inside and what kind of pump you want. This is a 120 volt AC current pump. So I got the cover off, and this is what I was talking about, the ring gear on it. So here I can take this outer ring out, and so you can see the internals. As you can see, as this turns, these pieces will open and close. So basically, this is expanding to pull fuel in, and this is getting smaller to push the fuel out. This is the pump you need. I've been running this pump for over 6 years now. You can see there's some scoring on it over the years, inside and outside of the surfaces, but it's not terrible for 6 years of all the oil I have picked up and gasoline I've transferred. You just want to make sure you have a screen on the pickup hose. Now we have the gasoline into the tote. Now we're ready for motor oil. Normally I would take that pump and put it over here and pump oil out, but that's not ready to go yet. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my big pump. I'm going to go get an empty tote. We're going to go and pick up some motor oil. Okay, I'm all loaded up, ready to go pick up motor oil. Like I said, I usually put the tote towards the back. I usually have 1 or 2 totes over the top, and I have one wrapped around like the front here, so in case I have to do emergency stop. And here's my pump. I have my extension cord. I have my short hose because I know where I'm going. I can get nice and close to their oil tank. Now I'm going to pump this oil out up into the tote. So now I'm just pumping it up out of the barrels up into the truck. I usually have a bungee strap on the top to hold that on so it doesn't come up out of the tote. So my bed sheet is starting to get a little clogged up from that used motor oil, so I'm going to show you how I clean it. Like I said before, when you use a wet dry vac, make sure you have some like rags underneath and something covering the output of it so it catches all the little droplets. So you're not getting like sprayed oil droplets like on your totes and stuff. So I'm going to get the majority of this oil out with the wet dry vac. Then I'm going to take it and put it down here on the ground. Now I got the majority of the oil out, and because the bottom of this is going to be clogged up, no oil should be draining through the bed sheet. Now it's down on the ground, sitting on a rag, in case anything did drip out the bottom. Okay, I don't know if you're going to hear me with the vacuum running, but basically I'm going to put this, while the vacuum is running, all the way to the bottom. And it's going to suck the air basically from the inside, and it'll pull it down towards the bottom. I'll show you. See how it just pulled itself tight? Just like that. So I'll show you again. See how just a regular wet rag? Hit the side and then vacuum all the air out. See how it's like drum tight now? Because the barrel's sitting down on the ground. It sucks all the air out. So now you can just kind of go around and suck everything out. So you start from the bottom and work your way up to the top. You can go straight line or side to side. So it literally pulls itself like drum tight almost. Now with the bed sheet all clean, now you can readjust your strap if you need to. This I do because I can see I have a little too much extra right here on the side. So I loosened the strap, I adjusted it, retightened it. Now I'm going to just kind of use the wet dry vac to kind of check it. So pull itself like nice and tight. Like I said, right here it won't filter because it's sitting against the side, but it's not terrible. That's the way you want it. And it does not have to be perfect because it's just going to get dirty again. So now you can see why I have the rags. This one caught all the droplets coming out of the wet dry vac. That one caught the little bit that came out of the barrel. You know, you just, everything you do with motor oil, you just do the best you can to keep everything clean. I can show you here with the wet dry vac on. Got the barrel back up on the mega funnel, get ready to start running some more motor oil. And like I said before, I've been using the same bed sheet for like over 5 years. You don't have to replace it. Okay, now this tote is empty and that tote is full of that filtered motor oil. So I just gotta take all the stuff, put it up here out of the way so I can take this tote out and bring another full one in. So put the lid back on, jack it up, and get it closer to the door. Now I can reach it with the forks. Got a full one set in the shop, set it in place. Got the pump in, ready to go. Okay, now this batch I made 2 weeks ago is now done, so now I'm going to empty this out. This batch is what I mixed for home heating oil. So this was 40% gasoline to 60% motor oil. I'm going to pump it out of there into this nice clean storage tote. This is going to be heating oil to heat the house during the winter. So you got to make sure, because this is going to be sitting all year, you want to make sure you have an airtight lid. This is a vented lid. I got to switch it out to one that's not vented, like this one. Because as it sits all year long, if it's vented, the gasoline will slowly evaporate and I would have to add more gasoline to it later. If I keep it airtight, it will not go bad, it will not evaporate, it will not mess up the mixture or anything like that. Like I said before, use a bungee strap so this doesn't come out. Then I'm going to put this almost all the way to the bottom. I'm going to keep it about 3 inches off the bottom. Look at that. So because this tote is going to be outside, I'm going to cover this up so the sun does not biodegrade the plastic. Like I was pointing out before, that other tote has been sitting outside uncovered and the sun just biodegrades the plastic and starts getting brittle. And so you do not want that to crack or anything like that. So this is going to be my new storage tote once that's empty. These totes have been lasting for several years because they're inside the shed and the sun is not beating on them. So over time they get a little bit of a yellowish color. So they go from like white to this yellow color when they start to biodegrade. But these totes are like 10 years old, these two mixing totes. Like I said, if you just keep them inside or keep them covered so the sun doesn't beat on them, you're good to go. Okay, I got that all pumped out, and so that normally fills it up to right about here. So I want to usually get these up close to the top. So what I'll do is take my pickup hose, stick it down into the tote of my filtered motor oil here, and I just added about like 10 gallons just to kind of bring it up to the top. I just hit it with the drill a little bit to mix it up. Okay, now that other tote we already vacuumed out, cleaned, and put about 30 gallons of gasoline in. Now we're going to fill that up with that filtered motor oil into that tote. Now this is filled with motor oil and gasoline. Now I'm going to use the drill to mix it up. Now that's all mixed. Now I'm going to vacuum clean this out, get it ready to mix another batch. I know it might seem like a lot of work per batch, but if you think about it, you're saving at least $1,000 on each batch. So that 4 or 5 hours you spend your personal time every week, you're saving like, what, $250 per hour basically. Now that batch is all done, and if I wanted to, I could check the viscosity with the dipper I was talking about earlier. And you can add more gasoline or oil to the mix. That's why I was saying I normally fill it up to 250 gallons of motor oil and check the viscosity, and then I can add more gasoline or oil to the mix. But I already know what mixture I want, so that's why I filled this right up to the top with oil, and I don't have to check. Now, if you're using different fluids like gear oil, power steering fluid, or brake fluid, and stuff like that, the dipper is very important to check viscosity. But like I said before, it does not have to be that critical if you're running into a motor. It's only critical for the furnace because they are a low pressure system. So that's pretty much the whole process from start to finish. So usually every Saturday morning I'll go out when I need gasoline. I'll go out, get a tote of gasoline. I'll go out and get 1 or 2 totes of motor oil, bring it home. So every week what I'll do is I'll pump this batch out, which will be done, into a storage tote, vacuum it out, clean it, put gasoline and oil in it because that will be filled by that time at the end of the week. And then during the week, you'll be filtering more motor oil, and at the end of the next week, you pump this batch out, clean it, put gasoline in it and oil, and you're good to go for another batch. So basically every week, that tote will be filled with filtered motor oil through the bed sheet, because that little pump runs all week long and I don't have to watch it. What I'll usually do is just go in the morning before work, I'll check it. When I get home from work, I'll just check it quick, and I just do that throughout the week. So once you get the whole process set up, you can make one full batch every week. So the first week, this would get pumped out, mix another batch. Second week, you would pump this out, mix another batch. Third week, you pump this out, mix another batch. Fourth week, you would pump that out, mix another batch. So you can keep going if you want to make it that fast. Or if you want to make sure it's nice and settled out and filtered, you can do it every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, you would pump this out, mix another batch. The next 2 weeks, you pump this batch out, and you do another batch. That's normally what I do, so I know this fuel is all settled out and good, and I don't need that much fuel either to keep up with my machines in my truck. So, well, thank you very much for watching the whole new series on homemade diesel fuel. Hopefully you learned a lot and you can start making your own. And go ahead and share this information with friends of yours so they can start making themselves. I know it might seem like a whole big process, but you know, one batch of fuel for only about 4 or 5